From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. This is Andre Johnson.
Junior.
Do not forget the Junior. Very important, remember the JR at the end of the name. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, to share, to rate, to review. If you're watching us on YouTube, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Get the bell notification. But when we drop that, fire content. And also, hello to the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Got it on my shirt here. Glad you have found us here. Hope you've enjoyed the expanded local programming that we have on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. And if you're watching it, you've seen us pop up at some different times of the day. A little earlier in the day, a little kind of early evening time. So glad you have found us here if this is the time of day you are watching it. All right, it's Wednesday. We should note the Saints practice today at the Superdome. I am heading there after we do this, Andre. So this podcast will be done before the Wednesday practice. So if anything major develops at the Wednesday practice, we will come back on Thursday and hit that podcast up like we would normally do in that scenario. But it's Wednesday. We did have some news this week, and that was that there was no news when it came to the quarterback situation. We are not going to spend this entire podcast on the quarterback scenario. I think I'll have a pod set up here that I think y'all will appreciate and like. But first things first, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good, nice, calm Wednesday. I got my hair cut.
I see that, nice.
Yeah, I'm feeling fresh and new again. And, like you mentioned, we've done a lot of quarterback talk. And there's still a lot of quarterback talk. We look in the comments, obviously, of our last post on YouTube, over 100 comments, everybody talking about the quarterbacks. It seems everyone's split one way or another. So what I'm going to do is the same thing we did during the OTA period where we posted a poll. Who do you think will win the starting quarterback job? Back then, it was like 51% Shuck, 49% Rattler. So now that we're 2 games in and Kellen Moore hasn't named a starter, so why would we wait till he names a starter? Let's get ahead of it now. Who do you think should start week 1 against the Arizona Cardinals? We're going to have that poll on our YouTube page. Go ahead and vote and let your voice be heard, Sean.
Yeah, so look, I was in the press room Tuesday when we were just all those, us media types. We're going to talk about what we think we might see. And, of course, we're going to talk about, when there is news, follow up on that news with a lot of questions you probably saw. There was a lot of questions about Kellen Moore about his quarterback scenario. There was a lot of us in that room thought perhaps yesterday was the day, or Tuesday would be the day that they would make that announcement. It is not to be the case because every team has their quarterback settled with the exception of, obviously, the New Orleans Saints. Do what you want with that information. To me, it's probably more of a sign that maybe Rattler's effort in the last game kind of sent them back to the drawing board a little bit. Yeah. Maybe I believe they were closing in on Shuck, and perhaps Rattler made him rethink things a little bit. I don't know. And frankly, we've exhausted that topic. And look, I love talking quarterbacks, but even me, I'm like, we got to move on to some different topics. So that's how we're going to address the quarterback scenario today, which you just heard from me. But in other news, I haven't done this in a while. The Saints have some roster moves to make, and guess what? Hey. I got a roster projection for you guys, and I think that's where we're going to go. I know that's where we're going to go with the big picture today.
Yeah, anytime you get Kellen Moore in a press conference to give an answer that's longer than 15 seconds, it was a really good question. And one of his longer answers on Tuesday was when he was asked about cut day. And he talked about all of the different things that go into those decisions because cut day is in 6 days. The Saints will have to make a decision on their final roster, who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. A lot of guys on the bubble, and that's what we're going to get into today with your roster projection. We're going to go position by position, who you think will make the team, who you think won't make the team, and get into why. And as much as we just said we're tired of the quarterback conversation, it only feels right to start with the quarterback position.
Yeah, we're talking about it in a different light. This is who makes the team. Obviously, Spencer Rattler. Obviously, Tyler Shuck. And I have Jake Haener on this projection. Obviously, the competition is as close as it's ever been. We still don't have a starter name. We just went through that. It remains deadlocked. The only iffy I have with this is they get tight in other spots. If they have injuries pile up in a certain spot and they need to grab a roster spot, is Haener's roster spot guaranteed? Could he go to the practice squad? I think that's at least in the realm of possibility. I'm not going there yet because the numbers, the way I worked it out, they wouldn't necessarily need that. But I still think it's Rattler, Shuck, and Haener. Pretty easy one. The only question is, do they keep 3? For now, they're keeping 3, or at least according to my projection. But that would be the only minor change or minor pivot if they had to make a pivot at some point.
Yeah, and that was my biggest question at quarterback is Jake Haener, especially you know who your two guys are, Shuck, Rattler. But Jake Haener at this point, maybe it would make more sense to let Jake Haener walk and bring in a veteran in his place. You know, you're going to have potentially, Cleveland still has a bunch of quarterbacks, 4, 5, 6 quarterbacks.
They got to cut somebody, right?
Right? Maybe Kenny Pickett, who seems like he's not going to be very involved in that
Got a connection to Kellen Moore.
Yeah, played under Kellen Moore in Philadelphia. Maybe he gets cut. Snoop Huntley, former Pro Bowler.
Yeah.
Maybe he gets cut, you know. So maybe somebody like that can do a little more in that room than a Jake Haener, somebody who, if you're Pickett, is familiar with the scheme and familiar with the coach and the offensive coordinator and, you know, maybe can provide a little more knowledge than a Jake Haener can from that QB3 role. So Haener's spot is really the biggest question mark in that QB room, but we've seen him go with 3 quarterbacks the last few years. If they did decide to roll with these 3 young guys, it wouldn't be a big shock.
No, it wouldn't. So that's just something to watch, and that probably won't be decided until next week, obviously, and it won't be decided until who would become available would also be one of the reasons to make a move like that. All right, what's next?
Up next, we're going with one of the most packed rooms on the team, the running back rooms. We're gonna have to let somebody go.
Yeah, we are.
A pretty big name.
And look, I don't have faith in my RB4 here, but I think you'll understand why. I want Alvin Kamara. I want Kendre Miller. Velus Jones Jr. has to make this team. I think he's been one of the top 3 or 4 players in training camp. Velus Jones Jr. to me has to make it. And then it was a toss-up out of Cam Akers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Devin Neal. Devin Neal has been hurt. Does that help him or hurt him? No pun intended. Clyde Edwards-Helaire of those 3 has played the best. Is he someone you can sneak back to the practice squad? Can he do practice? Yeah, I think he can. So is that someone that you can look to maybe add at some point later? Is that Cam Akers someone you can look to add to later? I think of those 3, I think Cam Akers has, to me, has looked a step slow. For this projection, I can't see him giving up on the rookie just yet. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire has had an interesting career. He's definitely had a much better preseason. I think he's outplayed the other 2. But the fear of losing a draft pick this early, that could be a concern. I don't think he hasn't outplayed anyone because he's been hurt, but he is a draft pick. He's a day 3 draft pick, so cutting a day 3 draft pick is certainly not unheard of. But for this projection, it might be different after the 3rd preseason game, but for this projection, I have Devin Neal in the final spot, and they cut and try to somehow bring back Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Cam Akers.
Yeah, I'm fine with letting Cam Akers go. He really hasn't had much of an impact since he's gotten here. Velus Jones Jr. is probably the biggest surprise because when he got signed, it was kind of one of those offseason signings you speed by because it's like,
no doubt,
who's Velus Jones Jr., former receiver, and now he's playing running back. But Velus Jones Jr. has had a really big impact, you know, in the training camp. You've seen his versatility in the games, and you need a versatile guy like that because we know what Alvin Kamara can do in the receiving game. But if he's not around for whatever reason, we haven't seen much of Kendre Miller from a receiving, you know, perspective. You look at the other guys in the room, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you know, Cam Akers, can they do it at that level? Maybe not, but Velus Jones Jr. was literally a receiver. So a guy who can fit into that AK receiving role if for whatever reason he wasn't available. He's been a nice surprise for this team. Clyde Edwards-Helaire would be a tough cut.
That, to me, he's one of the toughest cuts on my whole projection.
Tough cut because he's a good blocker, which is an underrated skill. He's got, obviously, he's from here. It would be a tough guy to let go, but at the end of the day, you only get so many roster spots.
Look, if they pivoted to Edwards-Helaire because of just what you just said, the blitz pickup, because I think this team's going to get blitzed regardless of the quarterback, I'm fine with that and trying to do something where maybe you cut Devin Neal, maybe he's the guy you bring back to the practice squad. I know there's always that fear of losing that player, but we'll see. All right, what's next?
Up next, we go to the receiver room, a room that's already seen a pretty big injury to Bub Means.
Yeah, it is a big injury. I went with 5 guys here. I went with Chris Olave, obviously, Rashid Shaheed, obviously. Brandon Cooks, who I still think is the 3rd receiver, but I think Mason Tipton is gaining on him. It's going to be hard to keep him off the field, but at least early on, I think they turned to Cooks. I think Tipton is a guy that, you know, look, he's been the MVP of the preseason and training camp, similar to what he was a season ago. But I do think he's done enough to earn a roster spot. Now, 5th receiver is purely off of measurables, and that is Cedric Wilson. He is the only bigger receiver that can run sort of the middle of the field and make somewhat of contested catches where There's a guy on you, but if you just kind of muscle it in there, he can box the guy out and make the catch on 3rd and 4. You need a 6-yard hook, he can kind of box the guy out. I think we saw the issue with that with the interception last week. Obviously, we rattling through it to Mason Tipton, who was not able to get physical at the point of attack when that corner was able to jump the route. Here's the problem. A lot of small guys, and Cedric Wilson is my 5th receiver. 5th receivers aren't always even active on game day. Yep. I look for this room to have some movement, whether that's a small trade for a bigger receiver, whether or not that's a guy that gets cut somewhere else for a younger guy and becomes expendable on the waiver wire. I think this room is a little incomplete, pun intended. I would probably search high and low for a big receiver because they're going to need that with the way they're going to run the offense. There's going to be a lot of quick RPO stuff. There's going to be a lot of high-low stuff, and you're going to be tested because whoever the quarterback is going to get a ton of press man. They're going to say, all right, can you thread the needle and make a tough throw? And that requires sometimes a big body guy to go up and make a 50-50 catch. So I think they're going to add someone to this room. But right now, those are my 5: Olave, Shaheed, Cooks, Tipton, Wilson. What about you?
And with those 5, the 2 odd men out, essentially, at the top of that list would be Dante Pettis and Kevin Austin Jr.
Yeah.
Dante Pettis, he has some value on special teams because we've seen him in the return game a little bit, but the problem is you mentioned the similar skill sets. There's not anything Olave,
That's just what you're going to do.
Rasheed, Cooks, Tipton can do that, Pettis can't do. So in that realm, you don't need another guy who's like the 4 guys at the top of your depth chart. So Dante Pettis would be expendable in that range. And then Kevin Austin Jr., he's another guy who's about 6'2". He plays big, but his hands have been a little inconsistent at times. So if you're choosing between him and Cedric Wilson Jr., you can kind of understand them going with the more experienced and reliable guy in Cedric Wilson Jr. So, receiver, like you said, the biggest thing isn't necessarily who's on the roster now, but who they can add, because I just can't see them rolling with Olave, Shaheed, Tipton, Cooks as their big 4. 4 guys with the same body and
basically the same skill set. Let's be real. Basically the same skill set. One might be a tad better as a route runner. One might be just a half step faster, but they're all basically the same type of player. Yeah. What's next?
Next is another position that has a lot of question marks in it right now, and that's the tight end position.
All right, for this projection, I'm hearing Moreau and Hill are not going to be ready for the start of opening day, and probably there's a strong chance those guys go. If they're not ready opening day, there's a strong chance those guys remain on PUP. So I have asterisks next to them. Obviously, when they're healthy, they come back. They're on the team, so we know that. So who's next? Well, you have Juwan Johnson. That one's obvious. Then you have 2 spots where which way do you go? Because there's a lot of guys that have had good camps, that have been around the ball. Is that a product of them being a good player, or is that a product of them? They don't have enough tight ends, and they need to get some reps, and they're getting a lot of reps. So with that in mind, I picked 2. It's Trayton Welch, who had the nice over-out catch from Tyler Shuck. He's had a good camp. And I had Jack Stoll, who's got a history with Kellen Moore. He is a blocking tight end. I think this team is going to be a lot of 11 and 12 personnel, which is either 3 wide receiver sets or 2 tight end sets. And when they do go 12, I think you're going to need obviously a blocking guy and a guy that can play in line and also run routes. I think Juwan can run routes. I think Jack Stoll can block. I think Trayton Welch is a poor man's version of both, and I want to make sure I highlight that because look, he was available. Was he an undrafted guy? Yeah, for a reason. Anyway, so who did I leave off? Well, I left off the 7th round pick, Maliki Mataveo. I just haven't seen him do anything. I just haven't seen it. I've been waiting for it too, and there's an opportunity. There's a huge opportunity. 7th round picks get cut often on cut day, and 7th round picks. We have a fear that these guys are all, if you waive them, they're all going to get picked, snatched up by another team. It doesn't always match up to the reality after cut day. Generally, if you have an idea of wanting to bring a guy back to the practice squad, most of the time you can bring a guy back to the practice squad. He seems tailor-made for the practice squad because I don't think he's ready. And this is not ready in a thin room. So I'm going Juwan Johnson, Trayton Welch, Jack Stoll with asterisks next to Moreau and Taysom Hill when they come back healthy.
Yeah, because there have been a couple rookies that the Saints drafted that I've been looking for, and you've seen a few. Andy Stutzman, Quincy Riley, Jonas Thinker. They've kind of jumped off the page defensively, but Maliki Mataveo, I've really been looking for him because this is a very thin tight end room because of all the injuries to Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau, and he just hasn't had any impact in the preseason. He hasn't had any impact really in training camp. But Trayton Welch, on the other hand, he's someone who we do this thing called archiving here at Fox 8, where you watch the game and you take every play from that player and you put it in a folder. And when you're making those folders, you're like, Trayton Welch, I never heard of that guy. But as training camp goes on and the preseason goes on, you keep throwing clips in that folder, and you're like, all right, Trayton Welch, he keeps popping up. And he had that really good catch from Tyler Shuck on Sunday. On Sunday. So, you know, I can see him making this roster, but that tight end position, Foster Moreau, Taysom Hill, get healthy soon.
Yeah, and that's another
position on the team.
That's a good point. That's another one where you can absolutely. It won't be hard to find someone that's released from another team that has a better skill set than this room. So I could absolutely see them adding a tight end as well, whomever that person could potentially be. All right, what's next?
We go into the trenches. Let's talk about that offensive line.
Yeah, I kept 9 on this projection. You normally dress 7 or 8 depending on special teams, but normally you would keep 9. I went with Fuaga, Penning, hopefully Penning's available, McCoy, Ruiz, Kelvin Banks, Jr.
Don't forget the junior.
Then I went with obviously Dylan Radins, your left guard. Where am I at here? Then I went with Landon Young, who is kind of a swing guard tackle, who's a reserve that's been done fairly well. I have the undrafted rookie that played center, Simpkins, who I think is getting a lot of praise for him being willing to step in and play, but when you watch the game, he definitely made some mistakes. He's not playing his natural position, which is why they traded for Luke Fortner. And since they made that trade, I haven't seen Luke Fortner play with Saints. I'm keeping him on the roster. So that's my 9 right now. Obviously, there has been a blow to the depth with Will Clapp and obviously Nick Saldiveri, but you got to battle through it. Hopefully, Penning is available for opening day. If not, soon thereafter. And they'll turn to Radins if they can't go. But because of that, hanging in the balance, this is what I was talking about with kind of the roster makeup, the puzzle. I think you gotta have another guy insured on your roster that can help, because Radins now becomes the starter. So now who is the backup to him? That's why I got 9 right here. And those are my 9. Fuaga, Penning, McCoy, Ruiz, Banks, Fortner, Radins, Young, and Simpkins.
Yeah, you know, and this is where it kind of helps to have a lot of guys on that offensive line that can play other positions. Because if things got crazy, if you know what hit the fan, like let's say one of your tackles goes down, and assuming Trevor Penning is healthy, if one of your tackles goes down, you have Landon Young who could play out there. But let's say something happens to Fuaga, knock on wood, bump Trevor Penning out there.
Right.
Slide Ray Dunn's in there. You know, you've got a lot of people who can move around. The only name that jumps out to me that you're letting go is last year's 7th-round pick in Josiah Ezra, who, again, when you have other guys who can play that tackle position in Landon Young, in potentially a Trevor Penning, you've got 2 first-rounders that is at each end of the offensive line, and Fuaga and Kelvin Banks, Josiah Ezra's spot, it kind of becomes, you know, expendable.
Yeah.
So now we swing to the other side of the trenches. How are we feeling about that defensive line, which is a little unique because of this new brand?
Yeah, so I separated it between edge players and defensive tackle / defensive end, because sometimes the naming can get a little confusing. So put edge and DL. So edge, which you would think of outside of pass rushers, and then D linemen who kind of fluctuate between those 2 edge pass rushers. Chase Young, Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan has certainly been the 3 names that have rotated the most. I really like the way Fadil Diggs has come on the last couple of weeks, a 7th-round pick that I think is going to make the team, that has done a good job of making you notice him, because he's got some speed, he's got some versatility. Then, I said I was going to do this. I'm going with Jonathan Bullard. Veteran that they added late in the process, can kick inside, can stand up. Not a perfect player, but I think one that can provide valuable depth to a group that I think can be pretty good this year, to a D-line that I think can be fairly good this year. So it's Young, it's Granderson, it's Jordan, Diggs, and Bullard. Who's the name I left off? I think it's pretty obvious. He's number 55.
It's a number you haven't seen often.
Isaiah Foskey. You've probably seen him on the field. He just
not around the ball.
Just not making enough plays. And I'm not here to rip on Foskey. I'm really not, because I was high on him coming out of Notre Dame. I had him in my mock draft when the Saints drafted him. I was so happy because of how productive he was. It just hasn't clicked. And the scheme shift was supposed to help him.
Yeah.
He's just nowhere around the ball. He's not making any plays in the pass rush. They're running right at him because he's taking bad steps inside. I think he had one little effort play on one decent effort play on a wide receiver screen in the second preseason game. But to me, we just keep waiting and waiting and waiting. This coaching staff didn't draft him, so I had to leave Foskey off of my list.
Yeah, Isaiah Foskey, second round pick, and it's not like it was a reach from Notre Dame.
Right.
He's one of the greatest pass rushers to ever come through Notre Dame, So when you look at Foskey, it just hasn't worked, and it's kind of a trend. You look at the offensive line, and they've invested a lot into that offensive line, but when you look at the way that Mickey Loomis has drafted edge rushers, now you've got Isaiah Foskey, second rounder, who's looking like a bust. Peyton Turner, first rounder, who was a bust. Marcus Davenport, who, especially considering who you could have taken in that spot, was a bust. Maybe this organization needs to relook, reconsider how they draft these defensive linemen, especially the edge rushers, because they haven't drafted a good edge rusher since Trey Hendrickson, and we know what happened and it's still happening with Trey Hendrickson. So, yeah, Isaiah Foskey, that's probably one of the biggest, most notable names to potentially not make this roster. What about on the interior?
All right, defensive tackle is an interesting group. The trade of Colin Saunders, made them have one less tough decision to make. I don't think Saunders is going to make this team. You have Brzee, you have Shepard, you have Godshaw. Vernon Broughton was finally able to do something in the second preseason game with the fumble recovery. He's been a little anonymous. Sometimes that's easy when you talk about this position, but I was hoping for a little bit more. Haven't seen a whole lot, but you're not giving up on a third-round pick after rookie camp. That's not happening. So to me, there's one spot left, and it's either Christian Boyd or it's John Ridgway. Ridgway is hurt right now. We'll see how long he is out. But I went with Christian Boyd, a younger player who showed some promise in that first preseason game. He's a guy that clearly understands his role. He's getting better at run stuffing. He's a true nose tackle. I think Godshaw's a true run stopping guy. I think it's this group. It's 5 players, and there's a little bit of fluctuation from D tackle to DN in the 3-4. But I'm pretty comfortable with those 5 right there.
Yeah, I think it was a really good trade of Colin Saunders. And Colin Saunders is a guy who was a really fun locker room guy to be at, a really great guy just to have a conversation with, But at the end of the day, like you said, Colin Saunders probably wasn't making this roster. He was kind of a relic of the previous system. He fit that system better than he fit this system. So to get rid of him and to be able to not have to cut him, but to trade him and get back a position that you need depth-wise on the offensive line was a good move by the Saints. But yeah, I agree. You can't let go of Vernon Broughton. That was a third-round draft pick. Christian Boyd, 6th-rounder last year, but he did have the sack, almost a safety against the Chargers. So he's already started to make a bit of an impact in the preseason. I like the guys that you kept. I don't think the biggest loss would have been Colin Saunders, but you didn't lose him for free.
Yeah.
You get back another offensive piece. So I'm fine with that.
All right, what's next?
Second level, linebackers.
I like this room. I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit because I know we're getting close. I like this room. I really am starting to like this room. Demario Davis, Pete Werner, Danny Stutzman are my top 3. And then who are your 3 backups? Nephi Sewell.
Right. He always stays around.
DeMarco Jackson, who I think is starting to come on a little bit. He's quietly had a decent camp. And the guy that's really turned it on the last week or so, Jalen Ford. I kept 6 backers, which is a big amount because these guys generally contribute the most on special teams, the backups. And you can throw another name in here. I had to leave him off of this one, but I wouldn't shock me if he plays well in the last preseason game, if he bumps somebody here. That's Isaiah Stallbird, who's kind of a linebacker safety hybrid. But for this projection, I like this group. Davis, Werner, Stutzman, Sewell, Jackson, Ford. And
Stallbird would be a tough cut because he led the team in tackles against the Chargers. He made a big special teams play on a punt against the Jaguars. So Stallbird's been jumping off the film in the preseason, but it's a really stacked and talented linebacker room, so I see why you like him so much.
All right, what's next?
Up next, let's start with the cornerbacks, one of the weakest positions on paper for the Saints right now.
Yes, tough one. I don't know how long Alontae's going to be out, but again, this is tricky with your roster puzzle. But I got 5 corners right now: Alontae Taylor, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Isaac Yiadom, Quincy Riley, and Ugo Amadi is my guy. Ugo Amadi is easily the smallest DB on the team, but watch number 0 when he is on the field. He's at that nickel, and he sneaks in with that nickel blitz, that nickel pressure, and disrupts players. I think he's a guy that's a little limited in pass coverage, but he provides some versatility. He's a very smart player. And if Alante's out, you need a true backup nickel. The other guy to consider is Terrell Burgess, who's more of a safety nickel hybrid. That's more of a big nickel situation. That's not to guard a slot receiver. That's more to guard a second tight end. So if I'm watching, as I've watched this and looked at how this secondary has come together and the way it's currently shaped, those are the 5: Taylor, Kool-Aid, Yadam, Riley, Amade. But like Deuce said in our last show, B&G, look for this group to be a group where they could find somebody it's either available now or available once final cuts come in.
Yeah, Ugo Amade, another guy as I was archiving that you didn't realize and watching it the first time had such a big impact on the game, but watching it the second time, he was all around the ball against the Jaguars. So the odd men out in that situation would be Rico Payton and Rajon
Wright.
Guys who just haven't made enough
practice squad
so
guys.
In the preseason practice squad guys. We're going to stay in the secondary. How are we feeling about the safety position?
My favorite group on the team. I love this group. I was so worried about this group, even more so after Tyron retired. I really like this group. Justin Reed, it's all the J's. Justin Reed, Julian Blackman, Jordan Howden, Jonas Sanker, Jonas, and JT Gray, the special teamer. That's 5 guys. They all have their roles. They all know exactly what they're doing. I love this group. Reed, Blackman, Howden, Sanker, Gray. I'm not even sure who else I would even turn to.
And now we can't leave them out. Before we got about 45 seconds left. Kicker, do you expect Groupie and Smith to make the roster?
No, I don't. Smith, I know he's got the international pass or whatever, so I don't think he counts. But no, Groupie won that battle by a lot. I don't think I've seen that many missed field goals in a training camp practice in my life from Charlie Smith. That's just being real. Zach Wood, your long snapper, and then it's Kroger. Over Burnip as the punter, as the winning punter. Could that change? Because I don't think I've been impressed with either one of them.
Yeah, honestly.
That's something they got to figure out. But I have Kroger over Burnip. So Groupie, Wood, Kroger are your 3 specialists. And that, my friends, is my second Saints roster projection.
There it is. A lot of big names that are getting cut. A lot of big guys who are staying. We'll see what actually happens in about 6 days.
All right, we got to go. For Andre, I'm Sean. We'll see y'all next time.